how can we engage the broader community in this discussion? And I'll open it up to anybody.
Well, I think there are a variety of ways. You know, certainly those that have watched the ASCD Symposium, that's one way to do that. But also partnerships. I know Lewis talked about partnerships that he has, and I love the example of you know, if you don't help that student will be the person that may be robbing your child or your family member. So really the conversation to me, if you look at it from an economic gap standpoint, and that ultimately this has some impact on you one way or the next, how can you not become involved? So for those of you that are not in high poverty environments, you know, I would encourage you to have the conversations about the things that have been brought up. Those that are policymakers, making sure that those voices are heard. I think those are some of the ways. And then those that are writers, in which there are many in the audience, to write and speak, you know, bring voice to the topics that we've discussed here. Those are some ways, but partnerships are huge. If you have the ability to partner with the school, do it. And if you are an organization and are not partnering with the school, shame on you, and change that tomorrow.
I was joking around in the green room. I said we should start a revolution. But the reality is we need to start coming together more. And I think people coming together and really starting to unite around this idea of improving our communities, improving the outcomes for our children, looking at poverty. If we start to do more of this work, and if we start to really advocate for our communities, and not only one person, you know, they always say the crazy principal wants this. No, really get people around the cause and start going to the policymakers, local politicians, and having them also understand and realize what we're talking about. I think that's an approach that we have to do. I think there needs to be more conversation with the people who are actually making these policies, and more conversation with people in Albany and in the White House.
And by having that partnership together, then you can open their eyes to where they fully understand this is why the school deserves more funding. This is what they're having to go through. And on a topic that you mentioned earlier, if you are labeling a school as a failure school, who wants to be a part of that? If you can get rid of that, then the community will start to take more pride in the school. People will start to give you better funding because no one wants to be part of a failure. But you're right, you're just serving more difficult children. And there needs to be more praise, but people also need to see the difficulties that you face within that school.
Well, I don't know if we're going in order, but apparently we are.
You're next.
So, you know, my response would be similar to what we saw in the schools we studied, and that is start from your vantage point. Start wherever you are. If you're a classroom teacher, start the conversation where you can. If you're a principal, do the kinds of things Lewis is talking about. We saw that over and over and over. If you're a superintendent, do that same thing. As an education community, you know, we've got somebody from the Teachers Association, we have somebody from the Rural School Community Trust, we have ASCD. What are we doing as a sector? You know, what are we doing from our various vantage points? Start where you are and start networking and talking about the issue. That's all I know to do.
Going in order?
We're going to go in order. Go ahead. Well, I guess I'd give everybody a little Southern advice. You know, there's nothing better to make you feel better than if you're a preacher than to preach to the choir, because they're going to sing hallelujah every time. But that really doesn't get us very far. Mm-hmm. I think Judy mentioned the other that you know we've got to get outside of just those we know are sympathetic with us. Yep. And we've got to have teachers understanding that if they confine themselves to simply the awesome and terribly important task of teaching students, they may find the walls of the school coming down on them. When you're in that grocery line, just turn around and say, don't I know you? And do you know what's going on with our schools? We've really got to get folks to, a little Southern advice, to proselytize, to go to those folks who we know are not with us, who don't have a belief that they execute, and those who are with us but simply don't understand just where we are in the nation on this whole business of public education. And finally, I'd say the conversation is not going to always be polite, especially if you think the conversation needs to get to the policymakers. And so getting us beyond our comfort zone, getting us to stop talking as much to the choir as anyone else, and to start talking to folks who we know need to be engaged, but may not, in fact, we know as well as we should. That's what we've got to do to get a conversation going that will actually make some difference in the goodness of time.
And I would go even farther. And if we're preaching, you know, there's preaching to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. I would say we have to make some people really, really uncomfortable. And you can stand in the grocery line and say, do you know what's going on in that school? I think there's also a time to tell people a really scary story. You know, what business do you think is going to come to our community if we've got a 62% high school graduation rate? I can't remember the town in Texas, but a major company decided not to move there because the obesity rate in that town was so high, they knew that they would have health issues. Those are big issues. Talk to a Chamber of Commerce about that. You know, what do you think the future of this community is if we don't fix this school situation? I think it's fine to scare people. That's how Mothers Against Drunk Driving got going. You know, they terrified people. It's not always a bad thing.
Thank you. I believe we have a question in the audience.
Good afternoon. I'm here with a group of leaders that are committed to being catalysts for change. And we're committed to doing that. We know that it's difficult to gain momentum and then to sustain the change that we're doing in our districts. I would like to hear from you all about how you are able to remain encouraged and motivated as leaders, and also how do you keep your teachers and your community motivated through the change?
Well, I think one of the things that was said earlier, you know, when you talked about the professionalism of the profession, you know, when teachers start with us, I talked about that home visit, but when they go in their classroom, they receive a budget, they have business cards with their name on them. We are so privileged to have every teacher that walks through the door. And it's hard to get into Jennings. We're high poverty, but our standards are so high that we test every teacher 4 grade levels above the content that they're going to teach. Because I must know that you have to be able to teach to the top. And so we really do believe that we are so privileged to have you, but it is also your privilege to be with my children. And so to know that, treating people professionally. We, you know, I know a lot of people can't give raises and those kinds of things, and no one's in the profession for resources, but I do think as a superintendent, and that's one thing I absolutely love about this job, because I'd still be teaching 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. I never thought I'd be doing this, but I love this because I can we can realign resources. Every year we've given a raise. We are one of the highest paying districts in St. Louis. And we are the highest poverty. That's really interesting because we prioritize how we spend those funds. So how do we keep teachers energized and how do we keep principals energized? Letting them know that you understand, they're heard, they're validated, and that you're going to work your hardest to give them balance and support. It's really, really just that. Your comment that you just made is all about privilege, about people have the privilege of not paying attention to this issue. And so make people uncomfortable. That should not be a privilege. You know, there's privilege socioeconomic and there's white privilege. And so to be able to say, I have the privilege of not seeing you or your problems is shameful. And I completely agree 100%. It is time to make people uncomfortable in a way that brings action, not just noise. You know, I'm near Ferguson. Protest without progress or action is just noise to me. But something that brings about action in a short period of time.
I have a 0 turnover rate in my school. I think for the last 4 or 5 years now. The only time you leave my school is if you retire or if you're promoted into an administrative position. And for my school, you know, you have to understand, I'm 98% free lunch. The 2% that are not, I'm not sure if they even fill out the application. But the reality is, you're not working in my school building unless you want to be there. The reality is you would run out of that building as fast as you could if you didn't want to be in the school. The one thing as a school leader that I do that I think keeps a lot of the people coming to the school is I take the heat. They do the work, they do whatever they have to do in the classrooms, but all the negativity, I take it on. So I'm good with that because I'm very strong and resilient, so I'm able to fight a lot of negativity that's said about the school or, you know, the politics around the school. I don't allow my teachers to be affected by that. And I try to create a positive environment in my building where the teachers feel appreciated. So I have 0 turnover rate, and you can check it. So
I would say as a teacher that exactly what both of y'all are talking about is so important as far as staying energized. I can come into my classroom every day and look at these kids and the improvements that they're making, and that can keep me energized. But if I don't appreciate who I'm working with, or I have no support from the people that I'm working for, then that can bring me down to where it's no longer worth it for me to stay there. But I am very fortunate not only to have wonderful students that I get to see the improvement and I get so excited to watch them grow, but I also work with a very talented group of teachers, and we all kind of try to stay on the same page, which helps our students. But at the same time, I work for a wonderful principal and a great superintendent, and they're very supportive of our schools. Our principal is very supportive of us. He will send out emails, you know, around test time. I told you all I just finished testing yesterday, and he will send out an email and say, thank you for all that you do to everyone in the building. And something little like that may not seem like a lot, but when you know that he's genuine about it and he takes the heat for you and he lets you just enjoy being in the classroom, that's the easy part about being a teacher, to stay energized. If you've got the support, obviously you love to be in the classroom, so it's not that hard to be excited when you're in there with your students, but you have to have that fundamental support from your supervisors also.
What they said was what we saw over and over and over, how leaders sustained the change and helped people and helped folks make fundamental changes, turnarounds in their schools, the same kinds of things. You know, supporting teachers in the same way that we ask teachers to support kids, know them, know who they are, know what their needs are, know what motivates them. That was huge. Reward them, appreciate them. The one thing I'd add is that many of them were very smart about emphasizing their bright spots. And so every bright spot, was put on the website. I'm thinking of one school district where it's near Boise, and the reason that I bring this one up is just because I have such personal experience with it. But this is a community where when I, 10 years ago, moved to Boise, this is a place that people did not want to send their children for athletic events. Mm-hmm. This was a very dangerous place. And with new leadership at the superintendent helm, he slowly changed the entire story that was told about this district by concentrating on the bright spots and every positive thing that was going on in classrooms, going on in the system. The district at large was on their website, freshened daily. He made a point to partner with the local newspaper to get story after story. And pretty soon people were asking 30 miles away, 45 miles away, what's going on in that community? Mm-hmm. It changed the story because folks do want to be part of a winning team. So get the mojo going and keep nurturing the mojo, you know, by getting it out. Bright spots.
You don't have to answer. We don't have to go down the line. We do have one more question.
I'll pass.
You'll pass on that one?
Go for the question.
Okay. Another question, please.
Hi, I'm Issa Cox from Rowan Salisbury Schools in North Carolina, and we are a district of transformation and of high poverty. And when you're living in poverty, you often don't have access to the exposure to the possibilities. And in Rowan Salisbury Schools, we recently went one-to-one and have truly invested in providing that access to students who otherwise would not be able to see beyond their own communities. And we've also partnered with our community to provide hotspots for those students so that they can have it outside of the school day. My question is, you've talked about the need to increase the flexibility in Title I and how that has often handicapped our schools. What policies have you seen that are having the positive impacts in our schools that we perhaps want to hold on to or want to duplicate in other areas?
Well, there are several, and in fact, even recently, and this is why I said earlier, you know, sometimes I think, okay, the president doesn't know, just like the superintendent sometimes doesn't know because they don't have tennis shoes and they're not in the classroom, or the principal doesn't know because they're a little bit far removed. And so just last week, and it's so crazy because we don't have a library in our community. I know it sounds crazy, but in Jennings, we don't have a library. We don't have buses. All the kids walk. And we have a really high attendance rate. See, teachers love bragging about their kids, so I'm going to keep doing that, you know, saying, here are great things. But because we don't have a library, I said, wow, why can't kids have access to the library that's outside, and why can't that be connected? And why don't we have e-books? And anyway, the Library Association in the last few weeks met with President Obama, so now there's this new e-book library initiative, and so now all of these schools will be interconnected. I mean, those are examples of just some practical kinds of things. He now has our Save Our Sons initiative and the mentoring programs. There's a jobs program that's out now in terms of communities like ours and yours. And so there are many policies, so don't get me wrong, there are many policies that are helpful. There are pieces of Title I that are helpful as well. It's intended to help the impoverished communities. However, what I am saying is that linked with a lot of these policies, there are regulations and procedures that prevent it from having the greatest impact that it could have in many, many cases. And so sometimes I'm not even sure what policy to suggest because I'm not a policy person, I'm more of the practicality. But I can say, here's what we're doing. The wonderful thing about Jennings is we're so tiny, we can try a lot of stuff and take risks. And I have a board that lets me do that, and not everybody has that. And because I can do that, we are able to do things to say, okay, now it's you all's job to figure out the policy to replicate this for larger districts. Food pantries, I'm not sure why every community does not have them in their schools. We feed 400 people a month, 8,000 pounds of food a month. It would seem as though if we can do that and partner with the St. Louis Food Bank, and every city has a food bank, that every school should be able to have a food pantry. So I'm not sure the policies that need to be created to make that happen. There's some that work, I think there are others that are missing, and some just have too many regulations.
One of the things that's happening in New York is the community school initiative that I talked about a little bit earlier. I think this is a great initiative. It needs to happen in all schools, especially schools that have communities that are lacking resources. What's great about the initiative is that now I have the freedom to partner up with organizations and provide them space in my school to provide the services and things necessary to meet the needs of the community. So if you want some information about the community schools, you can take my email address. Can I share my email address? Is that okay? You
certainly can.
It's ltorres2@schools.nyc.gov. I can talk, I can send you information about my whole idea around community matching. And then I could also talk to you a little bit about how to get partnerships. I'll give you an example. The New York Yankees is a great partner for our school. And all it took was me reaching out to the public relations office. And now we get free tickets, we get visits by players. They recently paid for a guitar program in the school. So, it's a matter of how to get the resources into the buildings and really knowing your community and knowing what you need to put in your building.
We're almost out of time, so before I do a quick wrap up, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to give you about 10 seconds to think of it as well, one final point or statement that you want to leave us with. And this time we will go down the line, starting with you, Judy.
Thank you, Sean. I think my one final thought that I would leave you with is actually a thank you to each of you for being here or for listening, and to take some of what you've heard today into action in your communities. I think we've heard from a lot of people that there are a lot of individual actions that can be taken that can make a difference. And then I would also ask you to think more broadly about what are some of these policy issues and to whose attention do you want to bring them. Thank you all.
I'm going to fudge and make 2 points. One is that we should really not forget that while we have been talking about the free and reduced lunch program here as an identifier of children who are low income in our public schools, it is a remarkably important and successful federal program. I would offer you the thought that it might be the most thoughtful federal program in schools today from the federal government. But it also ought to be continue to be expanded into dinner time as well, given the conditions that we face. The point I want to make to all of us is that wherever you happen to live, and whatever you happen to believe about fundamental things, if you believe in public education and that all children should have equal worth when they begin school, then you need to get involved in politics. That's where policy is made. And if you don't like politics, then just get over it.
My final point would actually be probably in a companion point to Steve's, and that is really tackling poverty is both. We have to have educators who are willing to become involved, because we are the folks that can talk about the realities on the ground. So it's both becoming active as a citizen and being not using the fact that policy isn't moving as fast as we maybe would wish it to, or maybe not at all, and society isn't changing as much as we believe it could to help us. Don't use that as a reason to not take action where you can in your sphere. So ask yourself, if you're a teacher, you're a principal in a school, are we doing our share and become active as citizens? It's both and.
My final thought is that these poverty communities are everywhere. They're not exactly in the Bronx, New York, and they're not in the foothills of Tennessee, but they're everywhere. And as different as your situation may be, there are also a lot of similarities, and we've discussed those today. So take what you've learned from here and apply some of these similarities, but also personalize it to your individual school or your school system to where you can make that community the best possible community that it can be.
I just want to say that if you are out there saying that children are first and that you believe that all children can learn and you believe that all children should have equal opportunity, but you're not doing anything to make it possible, you need to get out of your seat and actually get up and start doing something. Because at the end of the day, we could say it all we want, but if we're not taking action and we're not doing things, then at the end of the day, we're not benefiting the world. And we're not benefiting society. And like I always tell people, before I leave this earth, I want to make sure I've had a major impact on society. And I don't want to waste my time on this earth. If I'm not going to make change and I'm not going to make the world better than what I left it, I wasted my time on this earth.
Yes, my final point would be the economic disparities and inequities in education impact us all. We already know what we need to do to improve schools. The research is there, the strategies and the model schools are there. It's a matter of how uncomfortable are you to move from the privileged seats that we all have in some place to make the change happen. So, bringing voice to, bringing other people's voices of the underserved communities to the table so that they can be heard is crucial, and we are counting on you to make that happen.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking our guests. And we are slightly over time, so I'm going to wrap it up fairly quickly. And I'm going to re-quote Judy's quote from her article, which was 50 years ago, this nation launched the war on poverty. Perhaps 2015 can be its second and more successful campaign. And that's a campaign where, as Steve said, we don't sing to the choir. As Lewis said, we engage the community. We give back to the community, as Brittney says. That we do not see children or schools of poverty, but live in poverty, as Kathleen mentioned. And being provocative, as Judy mentioned. So with that, I'm going to bring this symposium to an end. On the screen, you have the website, www.ascd.org/WC Symposium, where this will be archived and available for viewing, hopefully within a couple of days. And that is the website where you can get all information. Once again, thank you, everybody.